All right, so another episode after a really long time of you don't need to know this, and work keeps getting in the way of life, or does life get in the way of work? I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to tell which way it's going. I suppose at a time like this, when there's so much uncertainty in the world, one mustn't complain. But today's topic is about complaining, and I'm actually going to start um, with this pretty interesting fact, which I mean, if there's one thing it does, right, it tells you not much has changed for many thousands of years. But before we get into all of that, I'm really excited. I've got a guest on today who pretty much my oldest friend, and we've cried into each other's diapers many a time. So I don't know how much clearer I can make it. So with me is Dheerin Motwani. We've been friends since we've been around three, and through the various ups and downs of life, I think we've come a long way. And Today, Dheeran is doing some really interesting stuff, and I'm going to give it to him to kind of introduce himself. And We're going to have a conversation about something that both of us, I think, have fairly clear views on. And Let's see where that goes. So, Dhiren, would you like to kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing right now, and then we'll just dive right in.
Yeah, Siddharth, thank you so much for having me over. And yeah, like Siddharth just said, we've known each other for about almost 35, 40 years now. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So a little bit about myself. Uh, I run a small family business which is focused on hotel supplies. And my background has been mainly in strategy and technology transformation. And that keeps pulling me into trying some of the other startup, which is in the whole area of trying to make technology do something for us, which is easy to implement and hits a very core area. So yeah, I keep dabbling with that, and that's a bit about me.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah. And also thank you for the benefit of the listeners, outlining what our respective ages are. Thank you for also making us feel old. Thanks, man. 35, 40 years. It really feels, it doesn't feel that much, does it? Like at some point you're just like, uh, wow, we're almost 40 years old. But yeah, that aside, I think Dhiren, I wanted to have this little conversation with you on this week's episode um uh because I think it's something close to our hearts, and yet I think we might have divergent views in some of the stuff we're going to talk about. All right, but I'm going to go in with the fact first. All right, and it's a pretty cool one. So back in about when was this? This must have been around 100 years ago or thereabouts, or maybe a little less. These guys were excavating the city of Babylon, and from one of the houses they were excavating, all right, this ancient city and the ruins, etc., and about the age of the Harappa civilization. They came upon a house which had all these clay tablets. All right, so clay tablets, I think we've got paper. Well, nobody uses paper anymore. We've kind of moved on from paper, but before paper you had various other elements that were used to actually write down, and the earliest forms of writing were perhaps practiced on clay tablets in Sumeria. And so these clay tablets in the Middle East, right, in Mesopotamia. And so this somebody had written down this letter to the chap whose house they were excavating, right? And the guy's name was Ir Nasir, and Ir Nasir was the chap whose house it was. And somebody had sent him a letter, and when they read through it, and they realized that it was a letter of complaint, because what he was saying is that somebody had sent him a letter saying, you promised to give me fine quality copper. I gave you my money, and the next thing you know, you've not given me good quality copper. I've sent my messengers there to get my money back, You have sent them away with contempt, sending them empty handed several times through enemy territory. And I have given you the money I have given you, but you have withheld my money back from me. And now it is up to you to restore my money to me in full. And so basically, he goes on and on, and it's in obviously very archaic language. But the funny thing is, when I tell you that story right now, right, and so finally, when they finally translated it, and they kind of realized it's the oldest existing letter of customer complaint in the world. It's almost 4,000 years old, all right, and I'm pretty sure there must have been complaints before this to various people. The funny thing is, in this guy's house, they found multiple of these, multiple tablets of complaint, and clearly this guy was a bit of a sidey tradesman, and he clearly deserved it because he had letters from all over the Middle East telling him what rubbish he was selling. Um, so so the thing is, so this idea of the outraged customer, all right, when you translate it into a language we speak today, it um is so recognizable. It's one is, as people who serve customers, I'm sure we've sort of been at some form of receiving end of this at some point or the other. But also as people who are customers, and who isn't a consumer this day, in this day and age, we've had reason to kind of put these across as well. So what I'd like to do, Dhiren, is, basing off this fact, I'd like to actually, and maybe we can take these roles, right? You as a businessman and entrepreneur, and me as perhaps a consumer advocate, can actually look at this whole idea of consumer relationships or customer relationships, building them, keeping them, handling them, and I'm just thinking about, and to kick that off, all right. I just want to talk about the first aspect, and this is something that I'm touching back to, I think, my third episode, right? My third episode talked about the fact that the future controversy in fashion, for example, is going to be about consumer data, because wearables are picking up data, all right, and who knows who's harvesting them, and who knows what security and what rights do consumers have to their own data, all right. And I want to actually ask you first, because I know you're doing something with consumer data generally, right? So a quick outline of what you're doing, and then I want you to kind of tell me what is the line that you feel as a business person in this space is acceptable to kind of handle consumer data. All right, so go for it. Just give us an idea of what you're doing.
Okay. So I think first of all, this fact that you spoke about, I'm sure the excavators missed another clapboard which must have read no refunds and exchange.
Highly possible. He sounds like that kind of businessman.
Absolutely. So I think, coming back to what you said, about um, the consumer data. So I'll talk about what we are building right now. The product is called Buzz and Go, and essentially what we're trying to do is capture consumer feedback, and we want to do it in a way which is non-intrusive, and we want to make it very intuitive to the customer, because I think the fundamental uh, thought behind the product is that while businesses want feedback and they want to understand their customer, but giving feedback is not part of the customer's journey, right? uh, they have the option to walk away, go to a competitor, to anything. They're not responsible to give a business feedback. It's actually our responsibility to extract it in a meaningful way, in a way that the customer doesn't feel violated. And I think that's a very, very fine line which a lot of people miss today. And that's where this product comes in, and we're trying to sort of sort that space out. Uh, and we're just very, very early stages right now. But I think the main fundamental behind this is to collect customer feedback without the customer having to part with a lot of personal information, which today they have to.
Hmm. So
So
fair enough. I mean, I get that you're trying to consciously draw that line, right? But at the same time, somebody with access to, say, the data you provide and a sort of back end data that may have already been collected on customers, for example, can kind of put together fairly a fairly detailed sort of composite picture of this individual.
Yeah, so I think, and again, I think a lot of businesses today are, they know data is the buzzword and collecting data is important, but I don't think people have a plan. The
Hmm.
whole idea is, while I have the customer in front of me, actually what I want to ask him is, how was your experience today? But what I'm going to do is, I'm first going to find out whether he's male or female, where do they stay, what is their age bracket, email ID, phone number, get all that, and then ask the relevant question. Oh, by the way, how was the experience today? Would you recommend me to a friend? And I think that's what is happening. The amount of data that is being gathered, I think only a fraction of that is useful for a business in terms of the plan that they have. The rest of the stuff is just sitting there. And I think that's a big risk in terms of misuse. And, people don't even realize the kind of data they've collected.
Hmm.
Now with technology, the amount of browser information that you can get of anyone who's, just basic things, right? If they visit your website, there's so much you can extract about that
Yeah.
particular person. But some people don't even know they have access to that data. And I think that brings us to the next question. Once they realize they have their data, they probably realize what are the laws around, maintaining and harvesting that kind of data, how it's supposed to be warehoused, what can be used, what needs to be deleted, what needs to be, uh, you know, uh, put behind encryption. It's I think something that people don't understand at the moment. But I think what they understand is gathering a lot of data is a good thing. And I'm of
Yeah.
the opposite opinion. I think you should pick what you need because it's a really dangerous space.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what you said about laws, for example, and compliance, right? So I know the EU has the GDPR. I'm going to come back to your thing, by the way, about relevance, all right? Because I feel that I think relevance uh, is a relative term. Uh, but I'm going to come back to that. But I just want to talk about the fact that when you talk about laws and when you talk about privacy, what should be encrypted, so I know the EU has the GDPR, right? General Data Protection Regulation, which is like the perhaps the most comprehensive regulation anywhere, right? But do you think, for example, here in India, that we're anywhere close to kind of having some level of the government being able to deal with this kind of thing, with data privacy, with this kind of story?
I don't know. I mean, see, so I'm not an expert in this field, but this is just what I'm understanding. And when it comes to the law, I'm not very clear about what's already in place. But I'm talking more from a practice perspective and
Right.
what businesses are doing right now. I don't think that awareness is there, and secondly, the ethics around, you know capturing data and how it's kept. So that part is missing, and I think we're very very far away from something like that. Obviously, the eye opener is going to be some hidden rule somewhere, and when some big businesses find a huge amount, I think that's when we'll actually get our attention to that matter. But I think till
Right.
it reach that stage, I don't think there's any sort of awareness in this. The whole law around data gathering and harvesting and warehousing.
Okay. 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 Moving on to perhaps a slightly less dry subject or dry aspect of this, like just kind of managing customers. All right. So one is, you have an irate customer in that ancient letter who seems to be, at least he seems to have a genuine issue. All right. Ki, yeah, I've given you the money, you've not given me the stuff I paid for, which sounds fairly genuine. All right. But there are some like really funny aspects of customer service, which, so the whole idea of the customer is always right, right? What's your take on that? Do you really believe the customer is always right?
No. So
This being recorded, I'm Motwani, so so
should have changed my name at the beginning.
okay, so
Yeah,
okay,
I still think no. So see, and I think it's only because of this uh, this particular phrase has been so overused that even customers now try to ride on this and try to extract every little bit from the business. But uh, so see, we run a very small hotel supplies business, and what happens is, I'll give you an example over there, right? So what happens is a lot of it, uh, the demand is quite unorganized, and a customer comes to us, saying that they wanted the stuff yesterday. Now, obviously,
Hmm.
lead time to, we don't trade, we manufacture. So there's a lead time to manufacturing it. It's highly customized, so it does take time. But we've gotten to this habit of pulling this off for them, right? So
Yeah.
they do get it fairly quickly, and then that becomes the norm. So obviously, the first time you're appreciated, the second time you do it, they trust you. The third time you do it, you've become, you've got some competitive advantage, and they want to keep coming back to you. But the
Hmm.
first time you can't deliver, and then at that point, you get into that kind of bit, right, where the customer says, I'm right. Like, if you delivered the last four times, why not this time? All I'm asking for
Hmm.
10% quicker, or, maybe just half a day quicker. But I think what you're missing is right from the beginning, we were always working on
On half a day quicker anyway.
exactly. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
and I think, that there, there's that very fine line whether when you go from customer satisfaction to dissatisfaction over something very basic. And at that point, you switch over from the customer being right to, you have to also protect your business. You have to protect the processes, the protocols that you've set internally. And at some point, obviously, you have to be profitable, right? So
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
calls, they need to be taken. And I think at that stage, I've never done it. Actually, we've done it a couple of times, but we have walked away from a customer saying that this doesn't sound right.
Right. Right. And it is an important skill. One of the things that I know for a fact that excuse me, I know that Indian IT companies, for example, spend a lot of money training their sort of staff in soft skills, right?
Yeah.
And one of the soft skills they impart is the ability to say no to a customer, because one of the apparently, and this is like, obviously they're already spending the money on this, so clearly this is a need. One of the biggest feedbacks they've got from international customers is that your guys don't say no. We'll say, do this, yes sir, do this, yes sir. Can they actually do it? No. And then, when the time for delivery comes, obviously there's a shortfall over there. And the customer feels that they have been, not exactly, been, they haven't been honest to them, whereas it's not that the guy is trying to be dishonest, but like a sort of good Indian salesman, he's not able to say no to a customer, right? So sometimes you're actually doing a customer a favor by saying no to them.
Absolutely. And I think, that transparency the customer also deserves. If you're not going to be true about the service that you're going to offer, and again, part of the service agreement is also an on time delivery. It's not about what you're going to give, it's also about when you're going to give. Both those together make a good experience. And
Yeah.
if you're not going to be true about either one of those, then there is a problem.
Right.
And
Right.
again, so just a little bit, I started my career with one of the top IT companies.
Right.
And again, this is something what you described is absolutely like, we did get trained and coached on how to sort of manage conversations which are going into the zone where we can deliver, but should we or shouldn't we? And, maybe it requires a bit more thought. So we were kind of coached on how to push things into the gray area for a while till someone more senior would come in and take a call. So that does definitely happen. And I think it's it's a very important training, especially here in India, because we are designed to please and say yes. Like that's
Yeah.
it's just the
Yeah.
default wiring that we come with.
Yeah. I think it's also a question of attitude to service, in the sense that, let me make this clear, right? When I go to a shop, right, and I go to a kirana shop, the shopkeeper, I mean, it's like, acha, हाँ ये भी है ना, ये भी है ना. And if I ask for something that's not there, they say, अच्छा वो नहीं है, but ये है. And there's like a cell of something else to replace that. So the idea that I can just sort of wave my fingers and have like somebody bring me this stuff, right? I think that was a big, also, a big kind of barrier to, um what's it called, a barrier to acceptance for modern trade or modern retail, in a lot of places outside of the metro, simply because the idea that you should do it for yourself, is such a like, people don't understand the point. If I'm going to a shop, I'm not going to do it for myself, right? There's somebody that should be there to do it for me.
Mm.
And uh, I think obviously those attitudes are changing, but you talked about processes, and that I think that is one big sort of area, a leap that perhaps is waiting to happen, right? Whereas service delivery perhaps in the West is seen as a process driven, you know process driven process, I guess. I don't know, you get what I'm saying. So it happens this way because that's the process it happens, and everyone understands that no one, there isn't a power differential in that sense. If anything, the sellers probably have more of a power differential than the buyers, than the consumers. um, Whereas over here, every consumer comes in with this hak se attitude, right? uh, and it's a bit of a fine line to walk to kind of balance that expectation of service versus being able to deliver it reasonably, realistically, and like you very rightly said, with some level of profit, obviously, for the business itself.
Mm.
I think that real, but the way, I think, the space that Indians are able to kind of navigate that. And here's a great example, is hospitality. And if you look at sectors like hospitality, cruise, and well, I don't know if cruise counts as a sector anymore. I don't know if there's anything left. But if you look at these sectors, there's a huge influx of Indians, and that idea that you're able to kind of offer a kind of personal level of service, which is what I think we're really used to, a really personal level of service. uh, with, and the ones who are able to kind of marry that with the ability of saying no, or being able to handle expectations in a genuine way, are really stand out as successful. So I'll give you one example. If you check out the Oberoi hotels reviews on TripAdvisor, and Oberoi has always stood out, at least in Asian hotel chains, as the epitome of service. All right, they're able to kind of kind of really stand out as reviews of being able to provide absolutely bespoke service in a truly genuine way. So I think Indians who are able to navigate Indian expectations can handle any expectations across the world, right? Um, so I don't know. What do you feel about that? What do you feel about, like, just the Indian level of service generally?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. But when it comes to five-star hotels in India, I think they've done a fabulous job in managing customer expectations. And again, I'll say that again, there's a very minor difference between these two things. One is service, the other is managing the customer's expectation. And I think that's the art, because if you can, from the onset, let the customer know what they can expect and what they can't, then it just makes life easier all around. But if you're going to, you know, keep letting them live in this false hope and expectation that anything can happen if you come and stay in my hotel and you ask me for this, that, and the other, and we'd be able to give everything to you, then I think somewhere or the other you're signing up for failure. And it may not happen. Like I said, the first time you do it, it's a wow. The second time you do it, becomes an expectation. But then third time when you can't deliver, then it's suddenly a disappointment, and that's not how it should be. So that's I think earlier on you need to be able to manage the expectation. Uh,
Hmm.
Maybe perhaps even if you're going out of your way to do it, let them know subtly that you've gone out of your way to do it. The next time around it'd be really hard to pull something like that. Don't say it in
Yeah.
words. Maybe tell them you might need some more time, you might need some more resources. I don't know. There are more polished ways of doing that. But I think, but the customer does need to know that there is a line and they can't go beyond that. And perhaps I put myself in the customer's shoe. I won't mind being told that, right? If someone tells me, whatever, if there's there are 10 items for breakfast. You're asking for number 11 and 12. That's fine. We'll do it one day because we didn't know your dietary preference. But this is how it's done. Tomorrow, just, let us know half an hour in advance. And I'll be like, yeah, that's fine. Makes sense.
Hmm.
Got to, you have to understand from a business perspective also, and understand that they're not there just to serve you. At the end of the day, they also have a P&L to report into. And every action that is done in the name of customer service has a cost associated with it. So you got to look at it in totality, and sometimes we do become unreasonable as customers.
At the same time, I would say, as speaking as a customer, sometimes, speaking out for, what I really want sometimes kind of breaks through and gets me something that I wouldn't have possibly gotten. Right. Uh, so I'll give you an example. All right. Sometimes when say you've got to go to a bank, uh, and this happens fairly often, and I've realized this actually works with like a lot of banks. If you go to the bank, well, nobody really needs to go to the bank to do bank work unless you've got some paperwork. All right.
Hmm.
But once in a while, I've had occasion to, and I've had the rule book thrown at me. Acha, this doesn't work like this. This is how it works. This is how you should. And then I've realized the game to play over there as a customer is uh, dumb but unrelenting. Okay, so dumb as in like, man, really, how does that? Can you explain this to me? Can you just show me? Can you just and just sort of like do this thing, all right? But also unrelenting in the sense that, yeah, but I can't, like, help this. I need to sort this out. I can't. And the thing is, without actually being confrontational about it, because I think one of the things that happens in India is I think that's probably generic, right? Is if you start getting confrontational, everybody's ego gets into the game, and then there's a bit of fighting over there, and then it turns into something else entirely, right? But over here, it's if you're able to stand your ground and just sort of keep pushing at some level, then the work kind of gets done. All right. And sometimes I feel, the Western approach, right, to customer service, which is process driven, and I'm being lazy here. I'm saying Western and Indian and all of that. What I'm trying to say is process driven versus interaction driven or human driven. All right. And the reason I'm discussing this so much is that I'm coming to this is all coming to a larger point which I'm going to arrive at, right? So the thing about process driven is that how much give and take is there, Dhiren? How much leeway to have that? Even the engagements you've talked about, right, in customer service, you've talked about, say, letting the person know, yeah, this time I've done it for you, but next time it's going to be, we need to make this kind of adjustment or whatever. That implies a kind of personal, a personal perspective, a personal charm, some level of charisma, whether it's on the customer side, whether it's on the service provider side, and that leeway is there, right? um, do
Hmm.
you feel that when everything becomes thoroughly process driven, I know you spent a few years in the UK, for example, do you feel that that takes something out of the service experience when it is totally process driven?
Absolutely. So I think, see, again, there is a fine balance, right? So there are certain aspects of the customer journey which can be process driven, but at the end of the day, you'll need humans on the other side, someone who can understand the emotion of the conversation, someone who has some decision making power to be able to take a call and address the situation. It can't be a complete algorithm. And that's where, I believe that maybe people talk about customer service will be handed over to bots and they can do everything. But I don't
Mhm.
think that's the case, right? So there is obviously some level of sophistication that a bot can do. It can understand what you're doing, where you're coming from, get the whole basics, maybe shorten the time the human being has to interact with you and give you a lot of intelligence to understand the customer's point of view. Um, that I think that's where the process can help. But beyond that, I think it is a human to human interaction, and I think uh, certain parts of the journey can be process driven, but I think for certain parts you still need the human to be on the other end, to be able to understand, I think, emotionally, and also have some decision making powers. Because otherwise, it's a thorough waste of my time where I'm trying to, explain something. Obviously, if I knew the process, I'd just go to the FAQ section and, have that
Hmm.
done. The whole reason I've, made a call, I'm sort of sat on wait for like 5 minutes or whatever, and then punched my credit card number 3 times to tell you what my thing is. And after that, if I'm going to be thrown back at the FAQs, then that's disappointing.
So, Dhiren, you've totally touched upon where I'm going with this. Okay, since you've brought up bots, let's talk about bots. Okay, let me give you some examples that I've had, and because you know what, I think we both know that that's where the customer relationship experience is going now, at least from what I can see. I know people who are training. So here's this: I know people who are training AI engineers in human interactions so that they can use their knowledge of human interaction, because they're AI engineers, I guess they live in this kind of uncanny valley of not being human enough but not being robotic enough. I don't know, that's just mean to engineers, but you get what I'm saying. So they're being taught human interactions and successful human interactions so that they can put it into their programming, and so that the bots that they're creating are as human as possible. So clearly that's where we're going. What you're talking about over here of, you want to kind of at some point you want to end up with a human to speak to. uh, we're heading to I won't even say a future, but a near present where that's probably not going to happen, no? So I know, like, a few years ago Google showcased at IO, they showcased that phone call to the hairdresser that assistant made, sounding completely natural, and so natural that the hairdresser didn't realize they were speaking to a bot,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're going there, right? So would I be right in saying that the future of customer relations is process driven, and probably in India as well? I'll give you an example. All right, so one of the apps I use to order food, at one point the food came in, and one of the dishes was, I think there was the wrong ingredient, or there was something wrong with it, basically, right? And I went to the help, and the help section was clearly a bot, and it said, okay, so choose the order, choose the dish that had a problem. What was the problem with the dish? Incorrect order or incorrect ingredient or whatever. And I clicked that, and it immediately said, do you want a refund right now, or do you want to reorder the identical thing? And so my loop over there was pretty much closed, without me needing to speak to anybody. And I was reasonably happy also. It's not like I was unhappy. Like, dude, you're giving me my money back, I don't mind. You're closing my loop over there.
Correct.
Do you think it's likely that, so how far do you think this is going? And do you think that humans are going to be out of the sort of customer relationship business after a point?
See, I think it's a this what you just touched upon. It's a clear, it's a cost benefit analysis, right? So if I'm going to be investing tons of money in training a human to be able to take a call and say that, oh, you should issue the refund, but the data that I have with me, and this is going back to the relevant data collection. If I have a lot of data about my complaints, and I think I know that I get only 5% of my complaints asking for a refund, I'm better off giving a refund straight away and saying, okay, just be happy, go away. So I think it's also understanding what your customers want and where your product or service is actually broken, and then investing resources into fixing it. Now, whether that comes through a bot or a human, that's a mix that needs to play in. And
But isn't a bot always going to be more efficient at that? I mean, bringing in, grabbing that huge amount of data, because it's not about one customer, no? So let's say, let's draw a line, okay? And maybe this is interesting. Maybe the future is different for most Indian organizations. So most Indian organizations, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? I want you to tell me if this is
mm,
true or untrue. Most Indian organizations are more unorganized than organized,
mm,
certainly when it comes to, say, stuff like whether it's their manufacturing practices or whether it's their labor practices, whether it's their go to market process, whether it's their customer relationships. They're not process driven, they're pretty much like ad hoc and relationship driven. Would I be right in saying this?
Absolutely. But I think go back one step
No,
and
sorry, I'll just add one more thing. Would I also be right in saying that in terms of scale, big data obviously serves large scale organizations better than it does small scale, right?
yes,
Okay, so would India be a separate case for the automation of? Would it be like a a joker in the pack, or a black sheep, or a standout case, or whatever you want to call it, when it comes to customer relationships using automation, right? Would it not really work over here? So what are your thoughts on that? And continue the thought you had earlier, and then if you can just address this.
yeah. So see, I think when you talk about big data, I think that makes sense for larger organizations if you're trying to productize the whole thing. But if I'm now come back to customer service, right? Like if you have a small business, you want to make sure your customers happy.
Hmm.
But trying to build a process for that. So I'm just going to simplify this. What is the process, right? We think it's something very complicated, but no, it's not. It's actually just a list of scenarios that the customer can approach you for, and the outcomes of each of those scenarios. And if you can have those covered, which is like a traditional call center training,
Hmm.
some sort of technology, even if it is a human being who picks up the phone, you give him a list of FAQs in front, right? Let them just keep typing whatever is coming being thrown at you. You can have something sophisticated which does that bit for you, and you have an answer. You have an indicator that this is a space you can go into, or this customer, okay, fine. It seems like based on their credit history, amount of business they've done with us, seems he's unhappy. They're eligible for a refund. Just go ahead and do it. If the refund amount is less than this, it's already sanctioned and done. So if you can, I think I think it comes down to the process designer and who's
Hmm.
thinking about the process. The more thought you put into the scenario planning and thinking about the outcomes, the more opportunity you have to automate it. Now, when I say automate, it could obviously mean bot, but it can also mean something as simple as scripting the whole thing, right?
Scripting the whole thing, yeah.
It's like a flow chart. If I'm able to just put my finger and follow that whole chart as I'm going through the call,
Hmm.
I'll reach the bottom of the tree, which will have something that I just need to read out.
Correct. No, so I just want to, no, fair enough. Okay, so that's the process. But I'm asking you now, from the Indian perspective, and you as an Indian businessman, an entrepreneur, right?
Hmm.
Look at your business, and perhaps not, I'm talking about your traditional one, because that I think is more representative of Indian business than perhaps your startup. Correct? Would I be correct in saying that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you see the scope in your traditional business
Hmm.
for this kind of thing?
Yeah. So see, this is what we're doing, right? So when I talk to looking internally in the business, I always tell my team that we're in the business of we're in the service delivery business, right? We happen to make packaging equipment, we supply to hotels, we do some printing, but actually what we're doing is we're providing a service. We're in the service industry, and what we are measured upon are two things: on time delivery and being right at the first go. So you give the customer what they want, you give them when they want. And that applies to any internal handovers also. So this is I'm just simplifying the whole thing. This is how we look at it.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
my attempt, and this is where I fail, but my attempt is to look at whatever has happened through the week and mark if it was delivered on time and if it was right the first time. And if it wasn't, it goes into a bucket, which is then analyzed to see like, what happened. We go more into like sort of finding out the root cause.
Hmm.
It was a particular supplier, maybe it was, you know, some strike happening that day, some transportation strike, which is why we got delayed, or power outage, whatever. There could be a whole bunch of reasons. We didn't understand the requirement in the beginning, several things, right? So that's what now I'm trying to build my own little database, which can then tell me that, okay, you know what, most of our service delivery mistakes are happening because we're not understanding the requirement in the first time. And that's where we might invest more time, more effort, more energy in. So I'm fairly certain a business our size, maybe even twice our size, won't find a product in the market that can, you know, as flexible or as customizable that bot or that automation might be. I don't think they'll have a solution for a business this size because we don't know our business so well.
Hmm.
Comes to
Hmm.
training a bot. I know my business. It's very typical. You sit across the table, I'll give you all answers. You ask me to put it on an Excel sheet, I won't be able to. A lot of people will say, this is how it happens, and that's the answer for most small businesses. For anything internally that goes wrong, they're like, "अरे इतना तो होता है," and it's
Hmm.
but it's not कि 5% allowance होता है मेरे business में, 6 है तो problem है, 7% है तो बहुत बड़ा problem है. They don't know that number, but जैसे थोड़ा बहुत होता है.
Hmm. But
Now,
I think people can. It's So the interesting analogy would be how Gordon Ramsay makes his food, and one of those Nawabi, what are they called, man? Khansamas. How they might make their food, right?
hmm,
uh, or and I have this discussion with my wife. Her grandmother was, I think, a cook of the very highest caliber. But whenever I try something, obviously so for me it's like, acha, so many cups, so many ml, whatever. That's the breakup for me, right? It's very recipe bookish. Whereas an outstanding cook like her grandmother, in the same way, right? They just chuck ke, by tasting it, by touching it, by seeing the temperature, by throwing in just a bit of salt or whatever, without having any idea of, if you ask them to write down and say about how many grams and all, they'll be like, oh yeah, you have to taste it and see, then you'll know.
hmm, yeah,
I think that's a sort of almost like a cultural fit for us, right? I mean, so in India, I've realized one thing, and again, this is not a good or bad thing. I'm just realizing, and maybe that has impact on business as well. We don't like to see things in black and white. I mean, we do. We love to. We love to say this is a bad thing. Don't do it. Your mama will be very unhappy with you, right? So that's different. But I'm saying generally, we don't like to draw a line and say, boss, this is a yes and this is a no. This is a black. This is a white. This is a whatever. Which is what I think process driven thinking requires as the most fundamental way of thinking, right? For us, everything is a spectrum. Like you're saying, if you ask somebody to put down a number and say, boss, put this number and say this is the number of the kind of 5% or whatever failure rate or whatever you want to call it, that you cannot go above, he may or may not be able to put down that exact number, but he'll be able to kind of say roughly it should be about so much, या इतना होता है उतना, इससे ज्यादा नहीं होना चाहिए, roughly, right?
true.
Can that kind of uncertainty be programmed for? Do we want to program for that kind of uncertainty? Do you think that's I'm just, why I'm having this conversation, Dhiren? I'm also trying to see, should we be wearing the straight jackets that the trends all over the world are telling us to wear? Ki bhai, automate this process, and that's the way to go. A, because of obviously profitability, etc. But B, because for whatever reason, that's the better way to do it. Is there another way that we can
Hmm.
kind of apply our kind of thought process to? Maybe one of the ways is, maybe everything should not be a multi-trillion billion dollar sized thing, right? Look at what I mean, they're deciding now, they're putting cases on Facebook to kind of
Yeah,
break it up because of the whole monopoly story, like WhatsApp and Insta and Facebook. Maybe that's the right way, is there such a thing as being so big that you become inhuman to the customer? Do you think that that's a way of thinking that works? Do you think that perhaps uh, organization should not be that big from a customer perspective?
so I think there are benefits as well, right? So the bigger the organization, the more network effects, and I think the better the organization understands the customer because they're coming in from different angles. And I think that's then comes the next question, which is the ethical part of how the organization wants to deal with that, you know, uh, whatever the model that they built of that customer. Now, I
am of the opinion that you can use, obviously you can use that customer information to segment, to build this ideal profile of your customer, find the next product that can be sold to them, and show them the ads and whatever. But I think there's also the other angle where businesses can use the customer's data to actually make the customer's life better. So, for example, take insurance, right? So, if I can analyze, and I'm just thinking out of the box, right? So, if I just
Hmm.
analyze all my customer uh, claims, or whatever I'm getting, or the demand for a particular kind of policy which might be related to a particular illness, I can almost tell people that if you do these three actions, you're going to be healthier than what you are today, and maybe give them some small rewards with those actions. Use data coming from, like you said, the wearables, right? Use some data coming out from the wearables, reward them for doing that extra mile of run, or getting up from their chair 12 times a day, whatever their goals might be. Give them a little reward and make their life better.
Right.
you know
So, they're already doing that, right? I think in the US, there are in the US and Canada, for example, they are already tying insurance to wearables.
yes, absolutely, and I think
Yeah,
that is
right. So,
right. So that's where we're looking at, and that's where I think the whole big data, the understanding of the customer from different angles, and larger organizations are obviously at a much uh, uh, they have a they have a more advantageous position to understand the customer better, because they're getting different aspects of the customer in different areas of life, and they're able to understand the customer more
no,
holistically.
I understand the advantage to the organization, and okay, like if they are decent, then there will be an advantage to customer as well. But I guess what I'm also asking is, see, at the end of the day, then finally, as organizations grow, they tend to monopoly. If you see what Facebook is doing, they basically tended to, and what happened to Microsoft earlier as well, right? So Microsoft also finally just tried to take over the internet. Of course, their thinking couldn't kind of evolve fast enough, but that's a different story. They tried. Facebook is trying. I think, however, and Google had that, has that whole story of do no evil.
Hmm.
Um, it's a tough credo to live up to when you're at that size, no? Because let's put it this way, yeah, when you're an elephant, whatever you do, you're going to crush an ant somewhere.
True.
So I don't know. I mean, I'd really like to. Uh, uh, Sometimes thinking about it, I wonder, in fact, if there should be an upper limit to the size of organizations, of privately held organizations, or listed organizations, for example. Would that allow for more innovation to grow? Because I would say, large organizations at the same time also stifle innovation, right? So there are studies that say that the larger the organization is, the less space in the market to actually. So the entry cost is for young innovators, or for innovators with less resources, is less, which means that innovation is getting stifled by a larger organization, which would mean innovation or benefits to customers as well. So what do you think, man? Do you think that that's or do you think that we should just kind of steer clear of that and just let the markets decide?
I think I'm of the opinion we let the market decide, because again, I think it's a very large overhead in terms of understanding what the maximum size of an organization can be. Now that you brought up Facebook, let's take them for example, right? So if you say Facebook can have only whatever 10 million users, what's stopping them from acquiring WhatsApp, and WhatsApp can have another 10 million users, and then them internally exchanging data and sort of understanding the customers better. And then you add Instagram into the mix, which has a few more million users. And then there's just going to be too many laws and a lot of overhead spent in trying to manage this. And there will always be that little loophole which allows something like this to be exchanged, and, for it to.
But that they're doing anyway, no, right now. They spend whatever $1 billion buy. How much did they buy WhatsApp for, by the way? $25 billion.
Yeah, I think so.
$25 billion, dude. What is that number?
So yeah, I think it's just, I mean, again, that one is obviously the way I look at it is there is a direct cost of what that technology is, and the second is the threat, right, of making Facebook irrelevant. In this case, Facebook Messenger. So I think they also are capable.
Sorry, but wouldn't you say the larger threat over there is, right now what WhatsApp has, a user to user encryption, correct?
Hmm.
So, but wouldn't you say, I mean, and what is the end game? Tomorrow, wouldn't Facebook be within its right to say, okay, WhatsApp has only paid encryption. Otherwise, everything is open to whatever. But if you do your so freemium model basically. So if you do WhatsApp Premium, everything will be encrypted, but perhaps there'll be a lower level of encryption accepting certain keywords, which would obviously reflect in, say, Facebook advertising.
I don't know, but I think see again, I'm not the expert with the data laws, but I think with something like GDPR and all coming into existence, I don't think something like this will fly. Uh,
Hmm.
you probably can have a freemium model, but not at the cost of encryption. There might be other levers which they can play around with, but something like this may not be that easy to
To
implement.
pull off.
Yeah, and
I
maybe
think now certainly people are getting, and governments also are getting a little itchy about that kind of thing.
yeah.
It's kind of like having weapons in most places outside the US. I think people believe that only the government should be the guys running around with guns. So I think data is becoming like that. I mean, so if you look at now, most of India has sort of handed over data when it comes to Aadhaar. I read recently that India has built this open source platform called MOSIP, MOSIP, right? Which is for it's the foundation open source. So we built Aadhaar, all right? India built Aadhaar. Now, whether you agree with it or not, that's a whole political story.
Hmm.
But then Nandan Nilekani said that, look, what if we could turn this into a kind of a modular platform to, because a lot of other countries, so when we did Aadhaar, privacy concerns notwithstanding, a lot of other countries came to us and said, look, how did you do this? Like, how, because if you can do it for 1 billion people, then you can do it to pretty much any other country in the world, right?
Hmm.
And so they've actually built an open source national identity platform, by the way, where it's at IITB, right, Bangalore.
Hmm.
And I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and like whatever, the whole gang of funders is on board with this. And there are lots of African countries that are coming on board to this onto this open source platform and using it to build national IDs. So at some level, people don't seem to mind the government having all the data, right? And but they draw the line perhaps at private organizations having that. And I think that's another difference between what we could call, say, the Western model and the Indian model. I won't even say the Indian model actually, because I don't think Indians are really very concerned about data privacy and stuff. Are you? Have you really noticed that sort of data aware culture or privacy aware culture over here?
I think it's starting to creep in now because, and I think somewhere, these telecallers are to be blamed because you do realize that your number, which when you go to a shop, you do a transaction, someone's making a bill, they'll say, "Hey, we need to have your phone number. It's mandatory," and you very conveniently give them the number.
Hmm.
The next thing you know, you get a call from someone absolutely random saying, "We got your number on a database." Now, I don't know where that
Correct.
went from, right? Who sold my number? I don't know. Whether it's the telecom operator, whether it's the retailer, whether it's, I don't know, my bank. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think right now I'm just not willing to part with my phone number with anyone, but the damage is already done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's funny and sad at the same time. So
Say.
when I get these calls, right, like,
Hmm.
"Sir, I'm calling from XYZ bank, we are going to give you unsecured loan," or some rubbish like that. I
Yeah.
tell them, or, some bank to zyada ho gaya, but maybe some weird company, I've never heard of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Finance, and we are going to give you an unsecured loan.
Correct.
I asked them, "Are you a registered telecaller?" Now, this is 3 times in a row I've got this response saying, "Sir, we have a GST registration." And I was stumped. I was like, dude, you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about and how you're. I said, my number's on D&D. Like, sir, हमको तो database में मिला है आपका number. And that's the end of it. So me being on D&D doesn't matter because my number is already sold. I don't know from where and how before that. And
Hmm.
the next thing I can do is I can't trust even my telecom operator,
Yeah,
D&D and whatever they have to offer. I'm just going to not give my number. And if that means a slightly uh, inferior customer experience, I think I'll live with that because I can't deal with these kind of calls at least 6 or 7 times a day.
I agree, man. And it's become so insidious. You're absolutely right. At random billing, like at supermarkets, sir, आपका phone number है. What's your mobile number, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do you need my mobile number? I'll give you points. So I was like, bro, and I used to do this. You know where my office was, right? So there,
Yeah.
I used to do this. I was like, bro, why don't you put your mobile number? You take my points. I have no problem. I don't care. I'm not going to collect your points because, as it is, don't get me started, by the way, on the whole idea of reward points from
For shares.
because, oh man, I mean, from genuinely, right? So what is it? It's 0.1% is the average sort of reward on a spend.
Yeah.
0.1%, no?
Somewhere there. Yeah. Depends
So
on
basically 1 rupee for every 1,000 rupees spent.
one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you kidding me, dude? I mean, really. And anyway, that's a whole other topic, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
but but I think this has been a good discussion, Dhiren. And I think what is really thought provoking for me is, and we've just barely touched upon the idea of what people feel about data privacy, um, what people feel about the idea of who they can complain to, of what the evolving mechanism for handling customer relations in India can be or should be. uh, I think we're continually going to kind of walk that line between not entirely process driven and process driven. I think India is going to be a big test case. It's kind of like the Aadhaar story, right? If you can crack AI driven customer relationships in India and get them working, then you can do it anywhere. So I think India is like that big test case. And it's crazy if you think about our country. It was the big test case for McDonald's, which finally you've got a potato sandwich which is being called a burger now, right? But they had to do it, right? Um, uh,
Really.
uh, it, it's the recently Kellogg's launched what's it called? What did they launch recently? Upma, right? Did you see that?
Yeah. Yeah. They launched Upma.
Break they've launched breakfast upma, right? And they came in with the idea that they were going to transform Indians' breakfast habits. So I think there's a lot of what's really exciting to me in all of this is that I think there's a lot of space for Indian entrepreneurs to look at models of customer engagement which are perhaps our own. I'm sure there are spaces that we can look at that whether it's human in the loop or however you want to look at it at some level, that these are models that we will create for ourselves, and if they work over here they will work anywhere. Because I think the advantage that we have is that at the top end of our talent pool, of our tech pool, etc., we've got people who can engineer with the best around the world. But at the bottom end we've got, I don't want to say bottom end, I want to say at the other end we've got customers who are, I cannot think of customers who are probably more demanding than Indian customers. And that's not a bad thing, I think, if you're okay with like fighting for your rights. But on a less serious note, tell me a really hilarious customer story. Come on, like you couldn't believe the guy. You're like, dude, are you like seriously?
Oh God. Uh, I think yeah. I mean, there've been so many of those, where they just come in and like we've got customers who come in and say that. So we do printing and packaging, right? So we've had people who've come in and say that they want something like this to be done. Like maybe it's complicated. box which needs to fit in something. And when the discussion is done, they're like, "अच्छा sir, अभी शाम तक मिल जाएगा." I'm like, what are you looking for, a design on paper or what? Like, what do you want by that? It's so confusing. And they're like, नहीं क्या print ही तो करना है. आप मेरे को दे दो मैं अपने printer पे कर लेता हूँ. I was like, yeah, really, if that works, then go ahead, do that, man. Like, I want to see the. So I think there's that level of people just assume that the kind of job you're doing is just that little,
Yeah.
not mile. It's like the last millimeter. Like that's just इतना print ही तो करना है क्या हो गया. And that's when you have
Man.
to tell them, it's a pretty long process. So I now have made it part of my sales pitch that when I finish talking about a product or when it finalizes, I actually explain the whole process to them how it's made. And then at the end of that, I think somewhere, fortunately, I don't get asked that question ki sham tak mil jayega. They at least like start with a few days, which is a good thing.
So I totally feel that. I mean, being in the creative field myself, it's the attitude is always like, yeah, but you just have to write a few of these lines down here and make a few designs. Why should this take so much time, right? And so and the so I have also slightly more evolved type of customer, right? Where he won't say something as foolish as that. What he'll say is, y'all are the experts here. You know how to do it. I'm sure you'll be able to do a much better job than me. What he's actually saying is, bro, I want exactly what I want. You better guess what's in my head and give it to me. But also within the timeline. See, you guys are the experts. You should be able to do it fast. So the expectation on time, expectation on delivery has not changed. It is still as unrealistic as ever. But now it's coming from a place of so-called respect rather than oh, this is so simple. But that customer story, I think, just like it just doesn't change.
Yeah, I think it's everywhere, every business, I think. And I think the customer also probably somewhere knows that milne wala nahi hai, but they still feel like try karna to banta hai. Like, that attitude.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
India. I mean, we got to, live with that.
yeah. I would genuinely love to hear from uh, people who in this space are open to conversations about what are the kind of uh, perspectives that we can discuss on customer relationships, Dheeran. So if you're having interesting conversations about this, or if you know somebody would like to get in on a conversation like that, whether it's on on you don't need to know this, perhaps perhaps a slightly more serious forum, because here we're also trying to have a little bit of fun. It would be great to kind of have those conversations, because there's a lot of opportunity out there that I feel it's kind of wide open right now, and it's worth having a conversation about. And I hope this has been a sort of interesting conversation for anyone who's listening in as well. uh, it's been a good one, I think, a very interesting one for me. More Dhiren, I hope it's been something that you feel was interesting to be a part of.
Yeah, totally, man. I think it was great. Great one.
Thanks, yeah, thanks so much. And also thank you for like really adding value and having that entrepreneur's perspective, which I clearly could not would not be able to bring to the table, because it's something that I think, being a serial entrepreneur, and I mean that in the best way possible, right, is a certain kind of attitude. And having that kind of attitude, I want to thank you for sharing those perspectives, on the podcast, because it's an eye opener for me also, some of the perspectives and the ways of thinking. So that's been great. And so I have been trying to make this podcast, by the way, once every week. It's clearly not working out right now in terms of once every week, just because, like I said, life gets in the way of work, or work gets in the way of life, how you want to put it. But I'm going to try and keep it to not more than, say, once in 10 days or so. I'll see everyone soon. Thanks so much, Dheeran.
Thank you for having me, Siddharth. And I think this is a great platform. You're doing superb for some of the other episodes, and it's great stuff, man. Keep going. All
Thanks, dude. Thanks.